Aloha, folks, and welcome to this edition of Five Questions, a conversation with community leaders that airs right here on News Radio 830 KHVH. It also appears on HawaiiReporter.com. Log on every day and find out the very latest. Today, we're delighted to spend some time with Representative Chris Lee. And, Chris, we wish you the warmest of aloha. How are you today?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Well, listen, we always like to start with our first question with perhaps telling us a little bit about yourself and, importantly as well, your desire to run.
Sure. I was born and raised here in Hawaii, in Kailua. I'm 30 years old now. Went to Iolani School and Oregon State University and came home to really just get back into the community. This is a place where I want to raise my kids and have a family one day. So I got an internship at the state capitol, started working there, got involved in politics and got hooked. The idea that one person even can make a real difference in the process and ultimately can push for anything from building better schools to fixing the budget or the roads, whatever it is, it grabbed me, and so I decided to run when the seat in the Kailua area opened up in 2008, and I've been serving in the House of Representatives for the last 3 years ever since.
Oh, that's tremendous. Tell us about your district.
Well, it's an interesting district. It's the 51st House District. It's all of Waimanalo and a good chunk of Kailua. And it's interesting because demographically, it's a real bipolar district. Kailua is growing fairly rapidly. It's generally fairly wealthy. Waimanalo, on the other hand, is very rooted in cultural tradition. It's got a large Hawaiian community. And it is almost Kailua as it was 50 years ago. And so it's interesting because the issues that each one faces are radically different. For example, on the Waimanalo side, because it's got a large Native Hawaiian community and because it doesn't have the growth that other places have, you have a whole lot of folks who are economically disadvantaged and have a lot of health issues. In fact, so much so that the federal government is putting in a ton of money into what's called the Healthy Hawaii Initiative, targeting Waimanalo to get residents in better, healthier shape because you have high rates of things like diabetes and other afflictions that typically affect the Native Hawaiian population. And so we've been working there to really try and get a grasp on that and get people and families healthier, eating local, eating healthy, things like that. There's a large issue with some of the highways in the area. Every couple of months, it seems, we hear about a fatal accident along Kalaniana-Ole Highway. So we've been putting a lot of effort into redesigning safer, better highways for both pedestrians and drivers. On the Kailua side, it's a little bit different because, again, it's a wealthier community. Tourism has been growing rapidly, and so there's a real issue that's come up, kind of a conflict between tourism versus local community. And it doesn't have to be that way, but it's played out that way. And so right now there's a battle to try and balance the two and make everybody happy. So it's a real fun district. I love the area. It's home, and hopefully we can make it better.
Thanks for that, Chris, very much. We're talking with Representative Chris Lee on this edition of Five Questions as we forge ahead. I'd like to talk about energy for just a moment because I know that this is part of your great involvement with the legislature. We had an interesting conversation on the morning show recently. This had to do with the cost of electricity, and folks were sharing what their price for electricity was and the bills and the escalating expense. We did a report on what the average kilowatt hour was on areas on the mainland, and unfortunately here in Hawaii, we were oftentimes double, sometimes even triple and beyond the cost per kilowatt hour. I was wondering if you could help us understand why our electricity is so expensive in Hawaii based in comparison to other states, and really what is the key to alleviating great expense of energy costs on the public?
Sure. I think everybody's familiar with this issue because everyone pays their electricity bill, hopefully. In fact, in our own home, we've been trying to switch out to more energy-efficient light bulbs and everything else, but we just can't quite keep up with that rising cost of electricity. And who knows in the next few years how high that's going to go. But really, it comes down to a couple of things that differentiate Hawaii versus other states on the mainland. The first thing is that other states are contiguous. So states can buy power from one another. So you could have a power producer in the Midwest who could sell, theoretically, power to states on the West Coast. And that kind of balances out costs and really prevents large, rapid spikes in prices on the mainland. Out here in Hawaii, of course, we're unique in that we're just us, and there's nothing else that we're really connected to very, very readily. And so we rely on imported fuel to power us. You hear the stats all the time, 90+%. But credit goes to Governor Lingo in the last administration and Governor Abercrombie in this administration for really putting on the front burner this issue, because we really want to make sure that we take care of this, because it underlies everything. It's not just the power we pay for in our homes, but it's the price that affects all our businesses, which in turn affects the price of all the commodities we buy, and down the line. Mm-hmm. We really want to change this, and one of the best things we can do, well, there's a couple things. The first is decentralizing power generation. It's called distributed generation. What that means is opening up the electric grid to allow individual homeowners or businesses, for example, to put in solar projects or wind or whatever it is that best suits them to save them power from having to buy power because they can make their own, which reduce their costs over time. In fact, one of the best things we just did right here in Kailua this past year was flip the switch on a $500,000 installation of solar photovoltaic at Lanikai Elementary School. Mm-hmm. It's a charter school, so they have to basically pay for all their own power. And so the state stepped in and said, well, this is crazy. They're wasting money on electricity, keeping the lights on, that they could be using for books in the classroom. So put in that system, and from day one, and they're about halfway through their first year now, they'll be able to save their electricity costs and use that money in better ways. So that's something that everybody can take advantage of, and we're trying to rewrite some of the regulations and the Public Utilities Commission regulations to make sure that this can happen, and that everyone who's an electric user and consumer will be able to do what they can to save money. The second part is looking to the future, because electricity is one of the biggest things that we're going to use, and we can't just we can't not plan ahead. We've got to plan for our consumption over time. The Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative, which both administrations, this one and the last, have been working on, has a goal of reducing our energy use by 40%, by 30%, and increasing renewable energy by 40%. So overall, we want to be 70% renewable by the year 2030. And what that's going to take is a massive, massive paradigm shift from where we're at. Because again, we burn all our energy through fossil fuels and the like, and we want to be able to take advantage of the resources we have. Solar on a massive scale. Right now, there are proposals for giant wind farms on the neighbor islands for connecting those and geothermal activity on the Big Island to Oahu, where the load is. And if we can do some of these larger projects, if we can do them right, which is a key thing, then hopefully over time, hopefully over the next couple of decades, we'll be able to stabilize our costs so that our electricity costs are no longer tied to the rising price of oil. And that's probably the real key there.
Talking with Representative Chris Lee, and just a bit on energy. One of the things that's interesting, Chris, is that using 2010 numbers is that the state of Alaska, clearly not a contiguous state, and also one that has, is renowned for fossil fuel energy sources, their cost of energy is dramatically less than Hawaii. We can all appreciate that, we do have the isolation here in the Pacific. But is there not a question about the subsidies that taxpayers make in regard to PV and also alternative sources of energy, that over the long run, the increased cost for the supplemental payments for this alternative fuel will kind of negate the savings that we're all going to realize?
Sure, that's a big question. Right now, there's essentially a 65% tax credit that people can take advantage of when they're putting in say, for example, a solar photovoltaic system. So the federal government pays a portion of that, the state pays a portion of that, and collectively, that's money that, while we save on the front end, has to be paid for on the back end, and naturally, that's coming out of our state and federal budgets, which means it's coming out of our taxes. So there's a question as to when is the appropriate time to incentivize our transition to solar. I think everybody can agree, or any other renewable energy for that matter, everybody can agree that, yeah, it's a great thing to do because over the long term, it'll save us money because we're not paying for oil and everything else. And really what's interesting about this is that if you look back to like the 1970s, before I was even born, or even before that to the 60s, there were efforts to move on a national scale and in various communities off of traditional sources of energy, not only just because of environmental reasons in some areas, but because potentially it could be a cost savings. But the oil embargoes and all kinds of other stuff that happened way back when that shot gas prices through the roof and energy prices too, faded away. And so we really stepped back. And there weren't a whole lot of credits and money set aside to incentivize our transition to renewable energy. And so we had this, 2-3 decades now of really getting back on that bandwagon as prices have risen. So it comes down to, is it, from a government standpoint, is it fiscally responsible? And is it fiscally, or will it pencil out in the long run to have these credits on board? And we think, to our best knowledge, because it's really an estimate of what the economy and the world markets and oil and everything else is going to do. We think that we're on the right track now. The legislature has reviewed the solar tax credit incentives and so forth and things like that over the last few years. There have been changes made, and it's likely to come up again this coming year. I do think that certainly this kind of analysis based on the best economic trends we can predict will definitely determine what level of credit there is going into the future and and how much that is, and how long it lasts. But the one thing we want to keep in mind, too, is that the one thing that everybody, I think, needs, especially the industries that have grown up around this, like the new solar industry, which is one of the fastest growing in Hawaii, the main thing they need is certainty. So we don't want to be tinkering with this at every little change in the market or predictions of economic performance over the next few years. We want it to be fairly stable and solid, so it can be relied upon, so business can really grow off of that. But all these things will be taken into consideration. At least I know there are those of us who will push for them. So I think that's the direction we're going to head as we review them.
Talking with Representative Chris Lee, 51st House District, on this edition of 5 Questions, and we appreciate Chris's time very much. I'd like to chat a little bit with question number 3 that deals with public access, and by access, I mean direct contact with not only representation, but also having a direct hand in the crafting of legislation and awareness of what is being developed and ultimately proposed via our legislative process itself. Can you comment about that, Chris, and give us your assessment of public access in our process?
Sure. Public access is probably the most important thing because it brings accountability to the process, and it brings accountability to the people who are involved in that, all our elected officials. There's any number of kind of backroom deals or underhanded sorts of things that we can point to in the history of politics, and we really want to step away from that. I got involved because that was the kind of thing that I had been seeing happening kind of across the country and here in Hawaii, and wanted to change that. And I think there's an opportunity today with focus from Tea Party, Occupy Wall Street, and all these other independents and everything else, looking at the process and saying something's fundamentally wrong here, and we got to change that. So that's key. I mean, this is definitely the most important thing. Here in Hawaii, I got to say, for all our shortcomings, in the past, we've done well changing that paradigm. We have a public access room at the state capitol, which I believe is still the only one in the entire nation today, which is a room, staff, equipment dedicated to engaging people into the process, giving them a place where if they don't have access to a computer or they don't have knowledge of how the process works, they're able to come in, and there are people there to assist them to do everything from testify on bills to reach out to their own senators or representatives or governor or what have you. That's been positive. Actually, a real good step that's happening this coming year. Because the federal government has changed the laws with regard to communications and broadcasting, the FCC has said that if you're going to be a major cable provider, like Oceanic Cable, for example, you have to provide access to our government process. So what's going to happen is there's going to be 3 channels, one dedicated entirely to the legislative process and ongoings in the House of Representatives, one dedicated to the Senate, and one dedicated to the executive branch and the governor. And along with Olelo, which has been doing a fantastic job of covering kind of the minutia of the process and meetings and providing that detail to the public, I think this will be a great step in the right direction. But again, these are only a handful of steps in what ultimately we hope to be a far more transparent process. I think what gets lost along the way, even though people can get involved and pay attention to what's going on when they have time, is that often the biggest decisions and the most important steps in that process tend not to happen at public meetings or in view of the public. And that's what we really want to change. You have, for example, a really important bill that might be passed and might do something great, but there might be one company that says, we don't really like this, and if they can talk to a few key representatives or senators to get them to kill it, it just won't be heard. There won't be a public hearing. So no matter how much public transparency you have, you'll never really know what happened to that issue and why it didn't pass. And so it's a long-standing fight to bring this stuff to light. And what that boils down to, the next, fundamentally, is bringing to light the relationships that elected officials have with lobbyists or companies or unions or who have you. And so that translates into the electoral process with what kind of money there is that's getting put into political races, where it's coming from, and what effect it's going to have on these folks once they're elected. So that's I think, going to segue perhaps into the follow-up to your next question, but that's going to be the next most important thing.
Yeah, that definitely is a great transition, and the reason why is that maybe you can describe for us a move that was afoot in the state legislature that would have empowered special interests with additional leverage in order to influence our process, but in a last-moment effort, that was quashed in the state legislature. Can you give us a brief description of what transpired?
Sure. This is maybe 2 years ago now, or two legislative sessions ago. There was a move at the time to rewrite our campaign spending and campaign finance laws. And what it would have allowed is for unlimited contributions from corporations, unions, et cetera, outside interests, to be put into the political coffers of political candidates. This would have been a huge, huge deal because it would have allowed much more money to be spent on elections and influencing those candidates than ever before. And at the last minute, toward the end of session, a few of us got together and said, this is not the way we ought to be going. And I sponsored an amendment to that bill. I didn't think we had the votes to stop the bill, but I sponsored an amendment to it which pulled that language out of there and prevented it from moving forward in that form. And there was a huge discussion about it, but at the end, I think everybody realized that we're right. This is something that has to happen because we can't just keep on going down with the same old, and letting the status quo fly. So we were able to corral, I believe it was a nearly unanimous vote to pull out that unlimited corporate contribution language from that law. And that's something that we're going to return to, I think, year after year because similar proposals, I'm sure, will be made in the future, and we'll just have to stay vigilant to prevent that from happening.
We thank you for that very much, and that leads us to question number 5 today, and that is a preview of what's coming up for 2012 with a whole spate of priorities. And I was also hoping if you wouldn't mind commenting, Chris, on your recent health issue that we were made apprised of on the television news. That must have been, at the outset, a very frightening situation, yeah?
Yeah, that was something that was totally unexpected. I was I was at a neighborhood board meeting answering questions from the board members, and suddenly realized that as I looked out across the audience, I couldn't see the people I was speaking to. I thought, oh man, I just stood up quickly and was just not feeling well that day. But it got worse, and I lost my balance. I had a severe headache. Vision continued to deteriorate, and I basically was lucky because I was right next door to a fire station. Happened to walk over there and collapsed on the ground, and they took me straight to the ER. And what I didn't know at the time was that I had been having a stroke. Again, I'm 30 years old, so it never would have occurred to me that this was possible. And I'm in great shape. I run all the time. I go run up Cocoa Head and go to the gym. But this is something that can happen to anybody. And the moral of the story is that I was very lucky, incredibly lucky, because I've returned to full health. I have complete use of all parts of my body. And unfortunately, some people don't. In fact, I was just at a fundraiser a day before yesterday for a great guy who didn't get help in time. He had a stroke. He had about 24 hours before he got to the hospital because he didn't realize what was happening to him because he didn't know the symptoms. And so what people need to do is be able to recognize the symptoms early, even if you're young, 20, 30 years old, because while it may be unlikely to happen to you, it can. But more importantly, if you can recognize those symptoms, you can recognize it in other people around you, your parents, your aunties and uncles, and it could save their life. The key is getting to the hospital early. And if you permit me just one sec, I'll go over just the 3 basic tests.
Sure.
Be able to identify what's happening in a stroke. And the first, it's an acronym. It's called FAST, F-A-S-T. It stands for face. Look at someone's face, ask them to smile, ask them to stick their tongue out. If they are unable to do so or only part of their face responds, that's one clear symptom. A stands for arms. Ask someone to raise their arms if they feel like this could be an issue. If one arm is weak or doesn't rise as fast as another, that's another key symptom. S stands for speech. Ask someone to speak. If they have trouble speaking, putting together a coherent sentence, or slur their speech, that's another key sign. And if any of these, especially multiple signs, ring true, then T stands for time, and that's the most important element. You want to be able to get to the hospital within 3 hours. If you can make it to the hospital in 3 hours, the odds are much more favorable to you. A stroke is the third leading cause of death in the United States, and it's the leading cause of permanent disability, but it's, for the most part, preventable in most cases if people can identify the symptoms and get help when needed. And that's probably the most important thing I'll say today in this entire interview.
No, I agree with you. It's I hope the awareness level continues to escalate, and by you being very public with your story and experience, you're going to be helping a great number of people, including myself. So I appreciate that very much. And I know that we had a preview of the 2012 legislature. I think maybe at this point, Chris, if you could just give us top-of-mind priority as we enter into January of really what's top of mind with you that you would like to see addressed with great deal of attention and focus.
Sure. Very briefly, that'll be the ongoing budget, making sure that our economy keeps rolling. We just had a report from the Council on Revenues, who is the kind of a slate of economists who give predictions as to what's going to happen here in Hawaii. We're projecting between 11 or about 14% growth this year, which is phenomenal over the last few years, which have been virtually flat. And this is growth in state tax revenues. What that means is that that's based on growth in the economy in general, which is projected much lower and slower than growth in revenues. But it's good because that's the kind of growth we need. Stable, steady. Be nice if it was a little bit faster, but it's important that it's not really volatile. And so we're predicting that we're on an upward trend, and things, hopefully, fingers crossed, will continue to be better here with increased tourism, with a return of people to work, and money continuing to flow. So we want to make sure that we keep certainty in our political governance of the economy in all respects, root out any unneeded spending at the state level if possible, save some money, and make sure people can get back to work. That's that's top of mind. There are 100 other things that are going to come up.
Oh, I bet.
If there's only one, that's it.
I understand that. If folks would like to contact you, Chris, what's the best way to do so?
Sure, they can give me a call. My office number is 586-9450, or they can shoot me an email, and that's repclee, REPCLEE, at capital.hawaii.gov.
Well, we thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better and to hear some of your thoughts about our state's condition and what's coming ahead. We, again, give you the best wishes on your health, and what great news that you've emerged so well, and also, really being singing the gospel of good health and taking care of one another. So for that, Chris, we thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much.
And we hope to talk soon. Take care today.
Aloha.
Aloha to you too. Bye now.